I stood in the kitchen, my hands gripping the edge of the counter so tightly, my knuckles turned white. Michael's words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Lily, we need to talk about Mom," he said, his voice tinged with that familiar mix of guilt and determination. I turned to face him, my heart already sinking. "What about her?" Michael ran a hand through his graying hair. "Her house needs emergency repairs, the foundation's cracking, and it's not safe for her to stay there." "Okay," I said slowly, bracing myself for what I knew was coming next. "She needs to move in with us, just for a few months until the work's done." The words hit me like a physical blow. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Michael, we can't. You know how she is. She'll take over our lives." "She's my mother, Lily. What am I supposed to do? Let her live in a dangerous house?" I could feel the frustration building inside me. "There are other options. We could help her find a short-term rental, or—" "We can't afford that," Michael cut me off. "And she won't go for it anyway. She's family. This is what family does." I bit back a bitter laugh. Family. As if Martha had ever treated me like family in the 30 years I'd been married to her son. "Did you already tell her yes?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Michael's silence was confirmation enough. "Of course you did," I said, my voice rising. "Without even talking to me first. This is our home, Michael, our life. Don't I get a say?" "I'm sorry, Lily," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "But it's done. She'll be here next week." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Next week? Michael, that's not enough time to—" "To what?" he snapped. "To come up with more excuses? She's coming, Lily. End of discussion." I watched him storm out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with the weight of his decision crushing down on me. I sank into a chair at the table, my mind reeling. Martha, living here. The thought alone was enough to make me want to run screaming from the house. The phone rang, startling me out of my daze. I answered it without thinking. "Hello, dear," came Martha's saccharine voice. "I hear I'll be staying with you for a while. Won't that be lovely?" I gritted my teeth. "Hello, Martha. Yes, Michael just told me." "Oh, good. I'm sure you'll make me feel right at home. You always were such a competent little homemaker." I could practically hear the sneer in her voice. "I'll do my best," I managed to say. "I'm sure you will," Martha said. "Oh, and dear, I hope you don't mind, but I'll need to bring Fluffy with me. You know how attached she is to her special chair. I'm sure you can find somewhere else to sit in the evenings." Fluffy, Martha's ancient, ill-tempered cat that hated everyone but her, and her special chair was my favorite reading spot in the living room. "Of course," I said, my free hand clenching into a fist. "Whatever makes you comfortable." "Wonderful. I knew you'd understand. See you next week, dear." The line went dead, and I let the phone drop from my hand. I stared at it, lying there on the table as the full reality of what was about to happen crashed over me. Martha was coming. She was going to invade my home, criticize my every move, and make my life a living hell. And Michael, the man who was supposed to be my partner, my protector, had invited her in without a second thought. I stood up, my legs shaky. I needed air. I needed space. I didn't know what I needed. But I knew one thing for certain. My life was about to change, and not for the better, and I had no idea how I was going to survive it. The day Martha moved in, our house transformed into a battleground. I'd spent the week preparing, scrubbing every surface until it gleamed, hoping to avoid her criticism. It didn't work. "Oh, Lily," Martha said, wrinkling her nose as she stepped inside. "You really should dust more often. I can see cobwebs in that corner." I bit my tongue, forcing a smile. "I'll take care of it, Martha." Michael lugged in her suitcases, grunting with effort. "Where do you want these, Mom?" "The guest room, of course," she said, as if it were obvious. "Though I suppose we should start calling it my room now." I felt a twinge of panic. "But that's my office. I need that space for work." Martha's eyes narrowed. "Work? At your age? Shouldn't you be thinking about retirement, dear?" "I'm only 58, I protested, "and I love my job." "Well, I'm sure you can find somewhere else to play with your computer," Martha said dismissively. "A grown woman shouldn't need a whole room for a hobby." I looked to Michael, silently pleading for support. He avoided my gaze. "Mom's right, Lily," he said. "You can set up your laptop in the living room or something." I felt like I'd been slapped. "But it's settled then," Martha interrupted. "Michael, be a dear and move my things in." "Lily, why don't you make us some tea?" I retreated to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I filled the kettle. This was only the beginning, and already I felt like a stranger in my own home. The next few days were a blur of snide comments and barely concealed insults. Martha criticized everything from my cooking to my clothes to the way I folded towels, and Michael, the man who once promised to stand by me through thick and thin, said nothing. One evening, I was working late on a project, my laptop balanced precariously on the arm of the sofa. Martha's cat Fluffy had claimed my favorite chair, hissing whenever I got too close. "Still pecking away at that thing?" Martha's voice made me jump. "It's nearly 9 o'clock, you know. A wife should have dinner on the table by now." I gritted my teeth. "Michael knows I have a deadline. He said he'd order pizza." Martha clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Take out food at your age? No wonder you're putting on weight. When I was your age." "I'm not putting on weight," I snapped, my patience finally wearing thin. Now, Martha said, her voice dripping with false concern. "There's no need to be defensive. I'm just looking out for your health. After all, you're not getting any younger, are you? And with no children to care for you in your old age?" The barb about my childlessness hit home as she knew it would. I blinked back tears, refusing to let her see how much it hurt. "I have work to do," I said, my voice tight. "Of course you do," Martha sighed. "It's a shame, really. If you'd focused more on being a proper wife and mother instead of chasing a career, things might have been different. Michael always wanted children, you know." I slammed my laptop shut, unable to take any more. "I'm going to bed." As I stormed past her, Martha called out, "Oh, and Lily, do try to be quieter in the morning. Your stomping around wakes me up, and I need my beauty sleep." I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Michael snoring softly beside me. How had it come to this? How had I let myself become a doormat in my own home? Something had to change. I couldn't go on like this, swallowing my anger and hurt day after day. But what could I do? As I drifted off into an uneasy sleep, a plan began to form in my mind. If Martha and Michael wouldn't listen to my words, maybe they needed to hear them played back. Tomorrow, I decided, I would buy a voice recorder. It was time to gather evidence of the hell my life had become. Little did I know, that decision would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. The tiny voice recorder felt like a lifeline in my hand. I'd bought it on my lunch break, heart pounding as I handed over the cash. Now, back home, I slipped it into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the smooth plastic for reassurance. "Lily, is that you?" Martha's voice rang out from the living room. "Come in here, we need to talk." I took a deep breath, pressed the record button, and stepped into the lion's den. Martha sat in my chair, Fluffy curled in her lap. Michael stood by the window, his back to me. "There you are," Martha said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Michael and I have been discussing your situation." I felt a chill run down my spine. "My situation?" "Your work, dear. It's becoming a problem." I glanced at Michael, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "What do you mean?" Martha sighed dramatically. "You're never home, always hunched over that computer. It's not healthy, and it's certainly not fair to Michael." "I'm providing for us," I said, my voice tight. "My job is important." "More important than your family?" Martha's eyes narrowed. "Michael tells me you haven't even started dinner yet. It's already 6 o'clock. I bit back a retort, acutely aware of the recorder in my pocket. "I was planning to cook after I finished my project." "See?" Martha turned to Michael. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. No wonder you two never had children. She's too busy playing career woman to be a proper wife." The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked to Michael, silently begging him to defend me. He cleared his throat. "Mom's right, Lily. Maybe it's time to think about cutting back at work. We could use the help around here." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Michael, my job pays our mortgage. It's not some hobby I can just give up." "Don't be dramatic," Martha scoffed. "Michael makes plenty. You don't need to work. Unless—" She paused, her eyes glinting maliciously. "Unless you're planning to leave him. Is that it? Are you squirreling away money for a divorce?" "What?" "No," I sputtered, shocked by the accusation. Michael finally turned to face me, his expression a mix of hurt and anger. "Is that true, Lily? Are you planning to leave me?" I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air in a sea of absurdity. "Of course not. How could you even think that?" "Well, what are we supposed to think?" Martha interjected. "You're always working. Never home. You barely speak to Michael anymore. If you're not saving for a divorce, then what exactly are you doing? I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. How had we gotten here? How had my hard work and dedication become twisted into something sinister? I think, Martha said, her voice low and dangerous, that it's time you made a choice, Lily. Your family or your precious career? Michael nodded, his face set in grim lines. She's right, Lily. Something has to change. I stood there, frozen, as the weight of their words crashed over me. They were asking me to give up everything I'd worked for, to become the subservient housewife I'd never wanted to be. In that moment, something inside me snapped. A lifetime of swallowing my anger, of biting my tongue, of trying to please everyone but myself. It all came rushing to the surface. No, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. What was that? Martha leaned forward, her eyes glittering with triumph. I straightened my spine, looked her dead in the eye, and said, No, I won't choose. I won't give up my career, and I won't let you bully me anymore. The room fell silent. Martha's mouth hung open in shock. Michael stared at me like he'd never seen me before. I turned on my heel and walked out, my heart pounding in my chest. As I climbed the stairs to what used to be my office, I could hear Martha's shrill voice behind me. Michael, are you going to let her speak to me like that? Do something. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. The recorder was still running in my pocket, capturing every word. This was just the beginning. The day of Ruth's 80th birthday arrived, and I felt sick to my stomach. I'd spent the past week avoiding Martha and Michael as much as possible, retreating to our bedroom with my laptop whenever I could. The voice recorder had become my constant companion, capturing every snide comment and heated argument. As we pulled up to Ruth's house, I plastered on a smile. Ready? I asked Michael. He grunted in response, barely looking at me. We'd hardly spoken since my outburst, the silence between us growing heavier by the day. Martha tottered out of the back seat, already unsteady on her feet. She'd started drinking in the car, claiming it was to calm her nerves. I bit my tongue, knowing any comment would only lead to another fight. Ruth greeted us at the door, her face lighting up when she saw me. Lily, dear, so good to see you. She pulled me into a warm hug, then turned to Michael and Martha with a noticeably cooler demeanor. Hello, you two. I felt a small surge of satisfaction at Ruth's obvious preference for me. At least someone in this family was on my side. The party was in full swing, the backyard filled with friends and relatives. I mingled, grateful for the chance to talk to people who didn't constantly belittle me. But I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. That feeling proved justified when Martha clinked her glass, demanding everyone's attention. I'd like to make a toast, she slurred, her eyes unfocused, to my darling son, Michael, and his wife. I tensed, sensing trouble. Michael, Martha continued, her voice growing louder, you've always been such a good boy, so patient, even when you married beneath you. A hush fell over the crowd. I felt all eyes turn to me, my cheeks burning with humiliation. Mom, Michael said weakly, maybe we should sit down. But Martha was on a roll. No, I need to say this. Lily here, she thinks she's so smart with her fancy job, but what kind of wife is she? Can't even give you children, can't even cook a decent meal. I stood frozen, unable to believe this was happening. Where was my voice recorder? I needed proof of this moment, this public humiliation. And now, Martha went on, swaying slightly, now she's trying to turn you against me. Your own mother. Well, I won't stand for it. It's time you put her in her place, Michael. Tell her who's really important in this family. I turned to Michael, silently pleading with him to stop this, to defend me. But to my horror, he nodded. You're right, Mom, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent yard. Lily's been selfish. She needs to learn her place. The world seemed to tilt around me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could feel was the weight of dozens of pitying stares. Ruth's voice cut through the fog. That's quite enough, she said sharply. Martha, Michael, you should be ashamed of yourselves. But the damage was done. I turned and ran, tears blurring my vision. I found myself in Ruth's guest bathroom, locking the door behind me. As I splashed cold water on my face, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. Who was this woman staring back at me? This broken, humiliated shell of a person? No, I wouldn't let them do this to me. I wouldn't let them reduce me to nothing. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and the voice recorder. I had weeks of evidence, weeks of abuse and gaslighting and manipulation. It was time to use it. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. This would change everything. There would be no going back. But as I replayed Martha's drunken tirade in my mind, as I remembered Michael's betrayal, I knew I had no choice. It was time to fight back. I unlocked the bathroom door, my head held high. Let them think they'd broken me. Let them think they'd won. They had no idea what was coming. I emerged from the bathroom, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. The party had resumed its uneasy chatter, but I could feel the weight of curious glances. Martha's drunken tirade had left a palpable tension in the air. Ruth approached me, concern etched on her face. "Lily, dear, are you all right?" I managed a tight smile. "I will be, Ruth. Thank you." She squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry about Martha and Michael. Their behavior is inexcusable." "You're right," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "and I'm not going to excuse it anymore." Ruth's eyes widened as I strode purposefully towards the center of the gathering. I caught sight of Michael and Martha, huddled together near the punch bowl. They both looked up as I approached, Martha's face twisting into a sneer. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence again," she slurred. "Come to apologize for ruining the party?" I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out my phone and the voice recorder, connecting them with shaking hands. "What are you doing?" Michael asked, his brow furrowed. "Something I should have done a long time ago," I replied. Before they could stop me, I pressed play. Martha's voice, shrill and cruel, filled the air. "You're a disgrace, Lily. A barren, useless woman. Michael deserves better than you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I watched as shock and horror dawned on the faces around me. Michael lunged forward, trying to grab the recorder. "Turn that off!" But I danced out of his reach, letting the recordings continue. His own voice joined his mother's, agreeing with her insults, laughing at her cruel jokes. "You see," I said, my voice rising above the cacophony of recorded abuse. "This is what I've been living with. This is what they're really like behind closed doors." Martha's face had gone pale. You've been spying on us?" "No," I retorted. "I've been protecting myself, gathering evidence of the emotional abuse you've subjected me to for years." The recordings kept playing, a litany of insults and degradation that seemed to go on forever. I watched as disgust and anger replaced the pity in the eyes of our friends and family. Finally, Ruth stepped forward, her face a mask of fury. "That's enough," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "Martha, Michael, I want you both out of my house. Now." "But, Mom," Michael protested weakly. "No buts," Ruth snapped. "I've heard enough. What you've done to Lily is despicable. I'm ashamed to call you my son." As security escorted a protesting Martha and a shell-shocked Michael out, I felt a strange mix of vindication and exhaustion wash over me. The nightmare was finally over, but at what cost? Ruth approached me, tears in her eyes. "Lily, I had no idea. I'm so sorry you've had to endure this." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "What will you do now?" she asked gently. The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. I looked around at the faces of our friends and family, some supportive, others uncomfortable. I thought about the house I'd returned to, now tainted by months of abuse and betrayal. In that moment, I knew I couldn't go back. Couldn't pretend things could ever be the same. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know I can't stay with Michael. Not after this." Ruth nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Whatever you decide, you have my support. Your family, Lily, the kind of family I'm proud to have." As the party slowly dispersed, I stood alone in Ruth's backyard, watching the sun set on the life I'd known. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with legal battles and emotional turmoil. But for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. I'd found my voice, my strength. And I knew whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. The recorder sat heavy in my hand, a testament to my resilience and a key to my freedom. Tomorrow, I decided I would call a divorce lawyer. It was time to start my new life. The days following Ruth's birthday party were a whirlwind. I'd moved out of our house, staying with a sympathetic coworker while I sorted out my next steps. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Michael, alternating between angry accusations and desperate pleas for forgiveness. I ignored them all. Today, I sat in my lawyer's office, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The recordings I'd made were spread out on the desk between us, along with financial documents and other evidence of Michael and Martha's mistreatment. "This is strong stuff, Lily," Sarah, my lawyer, said. "With this evidence, we have a solid case for emotional abuse and grounds for divorce." I nodded, a mix of relief and anxiety churning in my stomach. "What's our next step?" "We file for divorce and—" Sarah was cut off by a commotion outside her office. The door burst open, and Michael stormed in, his face red with anger. Martha trailed behind him, her eyes darting around the room. "How dare you?" Michael shouted, slamming his hands on the desk. "You think you can just walk away and destroy our family?" I flinched but held my ground. "There's nothing left to destroy, Michael. You and Martha took care of that." Sarah stood, her voice stern. "Mr. Thompson, you need to leave. This is a private meeting." Michael ignored her, his gaze fixed on me. "You manipulative bitch. Those recordings? They're out of context. You've turned everyone against us." "The recordings speak for themselves," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Everyone heard the truth." Martha stepped forward, her face a mask of false concern. "Lily, dear, we're worried about you. You're not thinking clearly. Come home and we can work this out as a family." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "Family? You've never treated me like family. You've both made it clear that I'm nothing but a nuisance, a failure as a wife and woman." "That's not true," Michael protested, but his words rang hollow. Sarah moved towards the door. "I'm calling security. You need to leave now." As if on cue, 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. Michael's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this," he snarled. "I'll make sure you walk away with nothing. You hear me? Nothing." As the guards escorted Michael and Martha out, I felt my resolve wavering. Was I really prepared for the battle ahead? Sarah returned to her seat, her expression grim. "I'm sorry about that, Lily, but their behavior only strengthens our case." I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. "What did Michael mean about me walking away with nothing?" Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Let's take a closer look at those financial documents." As we pored over bank statements and investment records, a sickening realization dawned on me. Large sums of money had been moving out of our joint accounts for months, funneled into accounts I didn't recognize. "He's been hiding assets," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger. "Preparing for this, most likely." I felt the room spin around me. All those years of hard work, saving, planning for our future, and Michael had been systematically dismantling it behind my back. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's expression was determined. "We fight. We'll need forensic accountants, maybe even private investigators. It won't be easy, Lily, but we can prove what he's done." I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what lay ahead. The divorce, the financial battle, the inevitable smear campaign Michael and Martha would wage against me. It all seemed insurmountable. For a moment I considered giving up. Maybe it would be easier to crawl back, to accept Michael's version of events, to return to the life I knew, no matter how miserable. But then I thought of the recordings, of the years of abuse and gaslighting. I thought of Ruth's support, of the shocked faces at the party when they heard the truth. I couldn't go back. Not now, not ever. I opened my eyes, meeting Sarah's gaze. "Okay," I said, my voice growing stronger. "Let's do this. Whatever it takes, I'm ready." As Sarah began outlining our strategy, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. The road ahead would be hard, but for the first time in years, I was fighting for myself, and I was determined to win. The courtroom buzzed with tension as I took my seat beside Sarah. Across the aisle, Michael and Martha sat with their lawyer, both of them glaring daggers at me. I forced myself to look straight ahead, focusing on the judge's empty chair. This was it. The culmination of months of legal battles, financial investigations, and emotional turmoil. Everything I'd fought for hung in the balance. As the judge entered and the proceedings began, I found myself reliving the journey that had brought me here. The recordings that had exposed the truth, the shocking discovery of Michael's hidden assets, the grueling depositions where I'd had to relive every moment of abuse and betrayal. Sarah squeezed my hand reassuringly as she stood to present our case. Her voice was clear and confident as she laid out the evidence of emotional abuse, financial deception, and the systematic effort to undermine my self-worth and independence. "Your Honor," Sarah said, The recordings you're about to hear demonstrate a clear pattern of emotional abuse perpetrated by both Mr. Thompson and his mother against my client. As the first recording played, I watched the judge's expression change from neutral to disturbed. Martha's shrill voice filled the courtroom, spewing vitriol about my supposed failings as a wife. Michael's voice chimed in, agreeing and adding his own cruel comments. I risked a glance at Michael and Martha. Martha's face was red with anger, while Michael looked pale and sick. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Their lawyer tried to argue that the recordings were taken out of context, that they were private family matters not meant for public consumption. But the judge wasn't buying it. Context or not, the judge said sternly, this behavior is unacceptable. As the financial evidence was presented detailing Michael's elaborate scheme to hide assets, I saw his shoulders slump. He knew he was caught. Just when I thought it was all over, Martha suddenly stood up, her voice shrill and desperate. This is all a lie. Lily's the abusive one. She manipulated Michael, turned him against me. She's trying to steal everything we have. The judge called for order, but Martha was beyond reason. She pointed at me, her face contorted with rage. You ungrateful whore, after everything we've done for you. In that moment, something inside me snapped. All the fear, all the self-doubt, all the years of swallowing my anger, it all came rushing out. I stood, my voice ringing clear and strong. No, Martha, you've done nothing for me except try to break me down. You and Michael both. But I'm not broken. I'm stronger than I've ever been. The courtroom fell silent. I could feel all eyes on me, but for once I didn't shrink from the attention. I'm not here to steal anything, I continued. I'm here to reclaim my life, my dignity, and the future you tried to take from me. And no matter what happens today, I've already won, because I'm free of you both. Martha sputtered incoherently, but Michael just stared at me, a mix of shock and something that looked almost like admiration on his face. The judge called for a recess, and as the courtroom emptied, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Whatever the outcome, I knew I'd done the right thing. As we waited to be called back in, Sarah turned to me, her eyes shining with pride. That was incredible, Lily. You've come so far. I nodded, surprising myself with a small smile. I have, haven't I? Just then, a court officer approached us. The judge would like to see both parties in chambers, he said. My heart raced as we followed him. This was it, the moment of truth. As we entered the judge's chambers, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever came next. Win or lose, I was ready to face my future on my own terms. The judge's chambers felt suffocating as we all gathered around her desk. Michael and Martha stood on one side, their lawyer whispering urgently to them. Sarah and I stood on the other, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Judge Hawkins looked at each of us in turn, her expression unreadable. I've heard enough, she said finally. And frankly, I'm appalled by what I've seen and heard today. She turned to Michael and Martha. Your behavior has been reprehensible. The emotional abuse, the financial deception, it's all grounds for a fault divorce. Michael's face fell, while Martha looked like she might explode. But the judge wasn't finished. Mr. Thompson, your attempts to hide assets are particularly troubling. I'm inclined to award Mrs. Thompson not just half of the marital assets, but punitive damages as well. I felt a surge of vindication, but it was tempered by a strange sadness. This was really the end of my marriage, of the life I'd known for so long. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Thompson, I commend your bravery in coming forward. It's clear you've been through a terrible ordeal. Thank you, Your Honor, I managed to say. However, she continued, I'm concerned about the recordings. While they've proven invaluable as evidence, they were obtained without consent. In light of the circumstances, I'm choosing not to pursue any legal action regarding them, but I want to be clear that this is not something I condone. I nodded, understanding the fine line I'd walked. Now, the judge said, I have a proposal for you all. We can continue this trial, air all your dirty laundry in public, and I'll make my ruling. Or you can agree to mediation right now and settle this privately. There was a moment of tense silence. Then, to my surprise, Michael spoke up. I'll agree to mediation, he said quietly. When Martha started to protest, he silenced her with a look. It's over, Mom. We've lost. The next few hours were a blur of negotiations. In the end, we reached an agreement that left me with more than half of our assets, including the house. Michael would pay alimony, and Martha would have no contact with me. As we left the courthouse, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of freedom. Ruth was waiting outside, her face anxious. When she saw me, she rushed over and enveloped me in a hug. "Oh, Lily," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I'm so proud of you." As we pulled apart, I saw Michael and Martha exiting the building. Martha stormed off without a word, but Michael hesitated, then approached us. "Lily," he said, his voice low, I'm sorry for everything." I looked at him, this man I'd loved for so long, and felt a complex mix of anger, pity, and something like forgiveness. "I hope you find peace, Michael," I said finally, "and I hope you learn from this." He nodded, then walked away. I watched him go, feeling the last threads of our life together finally snap. Ruth squeezed my hand. "What now, dear?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few months finally lifting. Now, I start living for myself. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I redecorated the house, erasing all traces of Martha's presence. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones. I even started taking art classes, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had the courage to try. Ruth and I grew closer. Our bond strengthened by the trials we'd faced together. She became the mother figure I'd always longed for, supportive and loving without being overbearing. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, Ruth turned to me with a smile. "You know, Lily, I always knew you had this strength in you. I'm just glad you finally see it too." I smiled back, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. "Me too, Ruth. Me too." As the sky turned from gold to purple, I reflected on my journey. I'd lost a husband and a life I thought I wanted, but I'd gained something far more valuable: myself. At 58, I was starting a new chapter, one filled with possibilities I'd never dared to imagine before. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited for what the future might hold.